What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about Canada in World War II. So, here in the United States, we definitely tended to focus on, what we did in World War II and everything that we accomplished and how amazing, the United States is. And apparently, there are a lot of things that they never taught us about Canada. And so, this video here actually did a comparison between the US and Canada in World War II. And it seems to suggest here that Canadian soldiers, pound for pound, actually may have been more effective than American soldiers, which I hadn't heard of before. So today, I want to take a look at this video, and it's called US versus Canada in World War II. Which army was deadlier per soldier? And I'm really interested to take a look and see if this kind of changes how I think about all this. So let's take a look.
Every Canadian knows the big names of World War II. The Americans stormed the beaches. The British held the line. The Soviets broke the Nazi war machine. But where does Canada fit in?
Yeah.
We sent over 1 million men and women to fight in a war that wasn't on our soil.
Over 1 million? Wait, what? How many Canadians were there at this point in time? During World War II? Weren't there right now there's 40 million, I think. So was there 20 million? 10 million? You guys sent 1 million Canadians to World War II? That could have been like 5 or 10% of your whole population. That's unbelievable. Wait, what?
We punched far above our weight. And yet, when historians talk about the deadliest armies of the Second World War, Canada rarely gets mentioned. Today, we're going to change that. We're putting the Canadian Army head-to-head against the United States Army. Not to see who was bigger. We already know that answer, but to answer a harder question, which army was deadlier per soldier?
Not necessarily like this is some kind of contest or anything, but you gotta admit this is a pretty fascinating question, especially for us Americans, because it's not even just Canada that we don't really know about, we weren't taught about. Here in the United States, we just focus on, American history, and we're definitely guilty of focusing and emphasizing that America is the best, the greatest, and we did all these and the biggest army and military, and we did this and that, which, yeah, there's truth to some of that stuff, maybe, but not that we are better than everyone else, but, some of the stuff that we did, like in World War II, that I learned about. But what I'm trying to say here, before I dig myself into a deeper hole, is we never really learned much about the contributions from other countries, especially Canada. And lo and behold, now it seems to be that Canada didn't only have massive contributions. In some ways, it may have been more than the US, which, I don't know. I think it's odd that they never taught us some of this stuff.
If you took 1 Canadian infantryman and 1 American infantryman, gave them the same rifle, and sent them into the same battle, who would inflict more damage on the enemy?
Yeah.
The answer might surprise you, and it might make you proud.
So are we talking about the training? Literally, this is so interesting because I have to admit, here in the United States, we take a lot of pride in our military and a lot of pride in our training and our soldiers. And here in the US, no offense, but Canada isn't necessarily known for that stuff as much here. So, what are we saying here? This is kind of like changing my whole perspective on this.
Before we compare anything, we need to define what we're measuring. Lethality isn't about bravery, it isn't about sacrifice, and it isn't about winning. Lethality is cold math. How many enemy soldiers did your army kill, wound, or capture, divided by how many soldiers you had doing the fighting?
Jeez.
This gives us what military historians call a casualty exchange ratio.
Okay.
If your army inflicts 2 enemy casualties for every one of your own, your ratio is 2 to 1. The higher the number, the more effective your force.
So we're literally, at least for this metric, trying to find out like if Canadians or Americans in World War II were more effective killing machines, for lack of a better word.
We're also going to look at lethality per soldier deployed. This matters because the United States fielded over 11 million military personnel during the war. Canada fielded just over 1.1 million.
I didn't realize it was 1.1 million. Obviously, we sent like 11 million, it said, which is more, but it actually sounds like Canada sent more, based on your population size relative to that.
If both armies inflicted the same total casualties, that would mean Canadian soldiers were 10 times deadlier per capita.
That's true.
So let's break down the numbers. The United States Army was a juggernaut. By 1945, America had deployed over 11 million men and women in uniform across every theater of the war: Europe, North Africa, the Pacific, and beyond. American forces inflicted approximately 1.2 million German military casualties on the Western Front and in Italy. In the Pacific, they accounted for roughly 800,000 Japanese casualties. Add in
It's kind of weird looking back at this. Like, obviously it made sense at the time, but now, like, Germany and Japan are our allies and stuff. So it's weird to think about, like, how we were actually killing them in this war. But, that's just history.
operations in North Africa, the Philippines, and other theaters, and the total climbs to somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million enemy casualties.
Jeez.
Those are staggering numbers, but America also had enormous resources to match. The United States military's greatest strength wasn't individual marksmanship or tactical brilliance. It was overwhelming firepower and logistics.
Sure.
American forces rarely attacked without massive artillery preparation. They rarely advanced without air superiority. They rarely ran out of ammunition, fuel, or food.
Yeah, this isn't. I gotta say, I guess this isn't something they even really talk about very much in school, even in the United States. Like, specifically the fashion and the way in which we waged war in World War II, where, by the sound of it, because the United States had access to a lot of resources, a gigantic military, bombs, artillery, that was our preferred method, because it, if you think about it, probably puts less of our men and women in danger if we're just like, it's weird to say, but for lack of a better way to say it, if we're just like bombing the hell out of people, rather than sending in infantry people to like physically shoot them.
At Normandy, American forces suffered around 29,000 killed in action during the campaign to secure the beachhead and break out into France.
Insane.
German forces in the same theater lost over 200,000 men killed, wounded, or captured.
My
That's a
God.
lethality ratio of about 7 to 1 when you account for the full campaign. But
pretty good. It's pretty good. For every one American who died, 7 enemy soldiers died. That's really obviously it's a travesty. Anybody had to die for this, but let alone millions. Jeez, it's crazy. You can really fall into the trap of like just talking about numbers and not even really thinking about millions of people died in this war. It's insane. Anyway, for the sake of, the metrics and the comparison here, it's like a 7-to-1 effectiveness killing ratio.
here's the thing. Much of that lethality came from bombers, artillery, and naval guns, not from the individual riflemen. The average
Sure.
American infantryman was well trained, but often green. Many had never seen combat until they hit the beaches. American tactical doctrine emphasized firepower over maneuver, which meant calling in artillery strikes rather than closing with the enemy.
I see. That's what we were talking about earlier. We're going to bomb the hell out of them. That's probably what the general said. Instead of like sending in our men or whatever, which makes sense if you can it makes sense. If you have the resources to do it, why not?
The approach saved American lives, but it also meant that American infantry, soldier for soldier, were not always the ones doing the killing. When we calculate lethality per soldier deployed, the picture becomes clearer. America inflicted somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million enemy casualties.
Wow.
They had 11 million men and women in uniform. Do the math, and you get roughly 1 enemy casualty for every 4 American soldiers.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute. So this is the final statistic. When you factor in all the different things. This is what we get? This is not good. This is not good at all. Wait, what is this? 4 U.S. soldiers for every 1 enemy? But we're only counting if a soldier literally kills another enemy soldier. They can't, drop a bomb on them or whatever. This is what it... Even still, I guess this... I think I'm getting a little defensive here, because this does not make us look particularly good.
That's respectable. But is it better?
Huh? 4 U.S. soldiers for every 1 enemy? That's respectable? Huh? Wait a minute. Am I understanding this?
Better than Canada? Canada entered the war on September 10th, 1939, a full week after Britain and more than 2 years before the United States. By war's end, over 1.1 million Canadians had served in uniform.
Wow.
Of those, approximately 730,000 served in the Canadian Army.
Wow.
Canadian forces fought in nearly every major theater. The disaster at Hong Kong, where 2 battalions were lost. The catastrophic raid on Dieppe, where 900 Canadians died in a single morning and nearly 2,000 more were captured. The grueling Italian campaign, the invasion of Normandy, the liberation of the Netherlands, and the...
Some of this stuff I've heard of. Some of this stuff I've never heard of before. I'm going to be honest with the Canadian World War II history. Some of this stuff I've heard here and there, and some I had no idea.
final push into Germany, and they made the enemy pay. Let's start with the Italian campaign. The Canadian 1st Infantry Division and the 5th Armored Division fought their way up the Italian boot from Sicily to the Po Valley.
Wow.
They faced some of the toughest German defensive lines of the war. The Gustav Line, the Hitler Line, and the Gothic Line. At Ortona in December 1943, Canadian soldiers fought house to house against elite German paratroopers in what became known as Little Stalingrad. The battle lasted 8 days. The Canadians took the town. German casualties were...
Some of this stuff, I actually feel like I've heard the name of before, but I never actually knew what it was or that it involved Canadians. Wow.
Severe, with the 1st Parachute Division losing an estimated 1,300 men killed and wounded. Canada paid with 650 killed and more than 1,700 wounded.
Jeez.
That's a casualty exchange ratio of nearly 1.3 to 1 in brutal urban combat against the best soldiers Germany had. Now let's talk
Okay.
about Normandy. On June 6th,
So already this first statistic is saying Canadians died at a lower rate than German soldiers, which is good. Good for you guys. Okay.
1944, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division landed on Juno Beach. They faced the 716th Infantry Division and elements of the 21st Panzer Division. By the end of D-Day, Canadian forces had pushed further inland than almost any other Allied unit. Some elements advanced
See that again, the kind of stuff they don't really tell us in the United States history class.
nearly 9 kilometers, among the deepest penetrations of the entire invasion. The cost was 1,074 Canadian casualties, including 359 killed.
Jeez.
German losses on Juno Beach and the immediate surrounding area were estimated at over 1,200. But the real Canadian killing began after the beaches. In the weeks following D-Day, Canadian forces faced repeated counterattacks from hardened SS Panzer divisions.
Jeez.
At the Battle of Carpiquet Airfield on July 4, 1944, the North Shore Regiment from New Brunswick and the Chaudière Regiment from Quebec attacked fortified German positions held by the 12th SS Panzer Division, the infamous Hitler Youth Division.
The infamous Hitler Division? What? Yeah, a lot of this stuff I'm not familiar with, and I didn't know. I didn't know Canadian soldiers were this badass, I guess, to be totally honest.
The fighting was savage. The Canadians suffered over 370 casualties, but inflicted an estimated 500 on the fanatical SS defenders.
Okay.
Then came the Falaise Pocket. In August 1944, Canadian and Polish forces were given the task of closing the gap and trapping the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army. The fighting around Hill 262, known as the Mace, saw some of the most intense combat of the entire Normandy campaign.
Oh my, yeah, like, I know in general we're kind of doing this, like, comparison between, which, again, is, like, questionable because, to be honest here, like, we were on the same side, we're allies, and we were fighting and dying together, so I don't want to make it seem like this was some kind of, like, bizarre killing competition. It's more of just, like, kind of a fascinating sort of historical comparison thing, and anyway, you know what I mean. I think as far as what we were and weren't taught in school here in the US, there is just, the more that this goes on, the more I can't help but think, like, there were so many really important missions that Canadian soldiers, contributed to, and battles that you won that determined the fate of World War II. Again, I just have to say again, like, it's just strange that we don't learn more about this here.
Canadian and Polish forces held against repeated German breakout attempts, inflicting catastrophic losses. When the pocket finally closed, over 50,000 German soldiers had been captured and an estimated 10,000 killed.
Oh my
Total
God.
German equipment losses included 344 tanks and assault guns, 2,447 vehicles, and 252 artillery pieces.
So this is what the Canadians did. Killed a lot of Germans, destroyed lots of tanks, vehicles, spearheaded the advance. This is really, really impressive.
Artillery pieces. The Canadian Second Corps played a central role in this destruction. Finally, there's the liberation of the Netherlands.
This I've heard of. This I know a little bit about. That Canada liberated the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is like very, very grateful. Even to this day, they're very, very grateful for this.
From September 1944 to May 1945, Canadian forces fought to clear the Scheldt estuary, open the port of Antwerp, and liberate the Dutch people. This campaign involved savage fighting through flooded terrain, fortified islands, and desperate German defenders.
Okay.
The Battle of the Scheldt alone cost Canada over 12,800 casualties, but German losses were even higher. Over 40,000 killed, wounded, or captured.
What? Okay. But just at a glance already, it's already starting to seem like I know which way this comparison's going to go. I'm starting to get the feeling that Canadian soldiers were actually more effective. What in many different ways, actually. Least of all in straight up killing enemy soldiers, but also in like winning battles. Sounds like Canadian soldiers, according to the data, were more effective than American soldiers. Is that right?
When we add up Canada's total record across all theaters, a picture emerges. In Italy, roughly 25,000 to 30,000 enemy casualties. In Northwest Europe, from D-Day through victory in Europe Day, approximately 60,000 to 80,000. In Hong Kong, Dieppe, and other operations, roughly 5,000 to 10,000. That brings the total to approximately 90,000 to 120,000 enemy casualties. Now let's calculate lethality per soldier.
Okay.
Canada inflicted somewhere between 90,000 and 120,000 enemy casualties.
Okay.
We had roughly 730,000 soldiers in the army. That works out to approximately one enemy casualty for every 6 or 7 Canadian soldiers. Wait.
So, I feel like I am interpreting this backwards or something. Because it was one enemy casualty for every 4 American soldiers. And now this is one enemy casualty for every 7 Canadian soldiers. What exactly does this statistic mean?
Wait, that's lower than the American number.
Oh, okay. No, I'm interpreting this correctly. All right.
But hold on, we need to adjust for something important.
Okay.
Here's the dirty secret of military statistics. Most soldiers never fire a shot. Of the 11 million Americans in uniform, only about 2 million were actual combat troops. Infantrymen, tankers, artillery crews, and combat engineers. The rest were support personnel. Truck drivers, clerks, cooks, mechanics, and medics.
Okay.
The same is true for Canada, but the ratio was different. Canada's army was smaller and leaner. A higher percentage of Canadian soldiers were in combat roles.
That makes sense. Okay. All right, hold on. Hold your horses. We're adjusting the stats. This is fair. Okay. In the American Army, there were so much more of us. So a bigger percentage of them were like non-combat roles because we could afford to do that.
Estimates suggest that between 250,000 and 300,000 Canadians served in direct combat positions throughout the conflict.
Okay.
If we recalculate using only combat troops, the picture changes dramatically.
Recalculating using only combat troops that literally saw combat. Okay.
America had about 2 million men in actual fighting roles.
Okay.
Against their 2.5 to 3 million enemy casualties, that means each American combat soldier accounted for roughly 1 to 1.5 enemy casualties on average.
Okay, good. That's much better. Not, I don't want to come across as insensitive because That's easy to do when you're just kind of coldly like these are real people who fought and died, and I don't care if they killed one enemy soldier or 27, and like they fought for our freedom and died, and that's a hero. But again, putting that aside, if we're just talking about like the stats to be interesting or whatever, um, this is good. This is better. For every one American soldier, they would have roughly accounted for killing 1.5 enemy soldiers, which is good. So we had a positive kill death ratio or whatever. If you it makes it sound like a first person shooter video game, but American soldiers killed more enemies than killed us, which is good.
Canada had between 250,000 and 300,000 men in combat positions, against 90 to 120,000 enemy casualties. That means each Canadian combat soldier accounted for about one enemy casualty for every 2 to 3 Canadians in the fight.
That makes it okay, so that's a lower kill death ratio. So now is this arguing that American soldiers were more effective? First, it sounded like Canadian soldiers were more effective. Now it's... Maybe this can explain.
Still lower. So what gives? Here's the key insight. Canada faced the Germans. American forces in the Pacific fought the Japanese, who by 1944 and 1945 were suffering from critical shortages of ammunition, fuel, and trained soldiers. Japanese units often fought to the death, inflating American casualty infliction numbers.
Honestly, now this is starting to just help me realize trying to even do a comparison like this might be just foolish. Like, maybe you can't do it. How would you ever get the accurate numbers, like really accurate numbers, for one thing, of how many people died, when and where, and who killed who? And now, it's true. What they're saying here is very true. The type of enemy that you fought would have been different. If Canadians were fighting more of the elite German soldiers and we were fighting the Japanese ones that fought to the death or were less equipped or whatever.
Canadian forces, on the other hand, spent the vast majority of their war fighting the German Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS.
Okay.
The most professional and lethal military force of the conflict.
Damn. That is pretty crazy. Yeah. And maybe it's because Canadian soldiers had a great reputation and we needed you to be the ones to fight against these crazy, well-trained, very deadly German soldiers. So this is actually arguing that the Canadian military fought against the most difficult of the enemies.
When American forces faced the same Germans, their exchange ratios dropped. At the Battle of the Bulge, German forces caused over 80,000 American casualties, while suffering around 75,000 of their own.
Oh, wow.
That's barely better than 1-to-1.
Okay, so when we actually look at an example of Americans fighting elite Germans, we have for one American, one German would die, basically.
Canadian forces, facing the same quality of enemy, maintained ratios of 1.5 to 1, up to 3 to 1 throughout the Normandy campaign, and the push into Germany.
Okay. So, okay. Now that seems like we're kind of getting to the end here, and this is officially arguing that Canadian soldiers were more effective, more deadly, especially against more difficult, German opponents.
So who was deadlier per soldier? If we measure killing power against the toughest enemy, the Canadian Army has a legitimate claim to being the more lethal force.
Okay.
Canadian infantry consistently achieved favorable casualty exchange ratios against first-rate German formations.
Wow.
They did it without the massive air and artillery support that American forces relied upon.
Sure.
They did it in some of the most brutal terrain of the war. The flooded polders of Holland, the fortified hills of Italy, the hedgerows and villages of Normandy.
That's a good point, especially if Canadian soldiers, you guys didn't even have as much of the resources and artillery that American troops had. You didn't have as much resources, and yet you arguably did better. Maybe out of necessity, and you did better with better preparation and training in other ways.
The American military strength was industrial. They could afford to lose men and machines because they had more of both. They used firepower to save lives. The Canadian military strength was tactical. They couldn't afford to trade casualties one for one.
Right.
So they fought smarter, harder, and meaner.
Well, you certainly would like to think that even with all this being true, American soldiers were not viewed as expendable. That's a pretty horrible thing to think, but it's definitely true that Canadian soldiers, by necessity, you guys had to be more tactical and more strategic and perhaps have different training.
German commanders noticed. After facing Canadian forces in Normandy, General Kurt Meyer of the 12th SS Panzer Division admitted that his elite troops had met their match.
Oh.
In his memoirs, Meyer described the relentless Canadian assaults and acknowledged that the Canadians fought with a ferocity his veterans had rarely encountered.
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't think Canadian soldiers get enough credit for this stuff. But clearly during the time, this was kind of even the Germans are complimenting the Canadians here, and even though you're killing them.
Field Marshal von Rundstedt, commanding German forces in the West, reportedly warned his officers that Canadian units were among the most dangerous they would face.
Ooh.
Per soldier, man for man, rifle for rifle, Canada was deadlier. The United States won the war through overwhelming force, and there's no shame in that. America's industrial might and logistical genius were decisive. But Canada won its battles through skill, grit, and sheer lethality at the point of contact.
Wow.
We didn't have endless reserves. We didn't have unlimited artillery shells. What we had was training, discipline, and a refusal to quit.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly not what Americans would want to hear, but that doesn't make it not true. Because, like I said, here in the U.S., we are extremely proud about this kind of thing, but yeah, based on the argument and the statistics that they showed, this definitely gives me a newfound respect for Canadian soldiers. Oh my God. A lot of Americans would be pretty shocked by this.
The next time someone asks you what Canada contributed to World War II, you can tell them this. We sent 1 million soldiers overseas. We liberated nations, and per man, per rifle, per bayonet, we were among the most effective fighters of the entire war.
Yeah.
That's not nationalism. That's history. What do you think? Was the Canadian Army deadlier per soldier than the American Army? And which Canadian battle do you think deserves more recognition?
Okay. There's a lot of different ways you could kind of measure this stuff and argue this stuff and say, oh, we did that and they did this, but we contributed this, so we're better than that. And so let's just be clear, my utmost respect for any American, any Canadian soldier who fought and died, during this whole thing. That's heroic selflessness that, I don't know, it's incredible. It leaves you speechless, kind of even thinking about it. It certainly deserves our appreciation. And, for the sake of argument, this was a fascinating video and certainly left me thinking, we we should probably appreciate Canadian soldiers more here in the U.S. and learn about them more, and be open to the idea that Canada, in many ways, contributed just as much, if not in some ways more, than the United States for certain parts of World War II. And yeah, it's something I didn't know. So this has certainly changed my outlook on a lot of this stuff. Very cool. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on this interesting comparison with Canada and the US and World War II, and any of your thoughts on this. That'd be cool to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canadian things that I've never seen before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.